Hi, in this video we're going to go through component 1. So this is exploring user interface design. Our main focus is going to be the task 1A and task 1B. Once we've gone through all of the slides, hopefully you'll be more confident and you'll be able to approach the PSA with a bit more clarity. So task 1A is your project proposal. For this you want to start off with the purpose. So the purpose is to do with what is the main goal of the project. Once you have an understanding of what the main goal of the project is, you'll then be able to write in much more detail as you go through the next section. So the first paragraph you've got to write is the purpose of the project. You may want to think about who will be using the system. So this could be the users. So this would be the employees. Would the employees be using the system? What role will they have? Will they be putting products on there? Will they be adding classes in there? Will they be changing certain things? And in terms of customers, what are customers going to do? Are they going to be viewing products? Are they going to be purchasing things? Are they going to book things? That will give you lots of information and things to discuss and write in your own words. You may want to outline some of the resources. So for example, the budget that you've got. So that's the actual money that has been allocated for this project. The requirements. So the requirements might reference how many screens you need, how the system needs to be designed, the accessibility features, the audience for the system, the time you've got, the number of weeks allocated to complete this particular project, and the tools you may need to perform this task effectively. Sometimes it's useful to provide some background on the organization that this project is going to serve. So it might be if it's the entertainment industry, if it's the retail industry. In writing about that, you can then kind of reference the type of users they may get, who may be using those particular systems, and then think about why a digital system might be needed, and think about how this system might be utilized by this particular business. The next section you're going to write, this is your next paragraph. You're going to be writing multiple paragraphs, but this is the next section, is your audience. The question I would be asking is, who will be using the digital information point? Is it adults? Is it children? Is there specific groups of people that will be using it? Do they have any specific needs? What do they need from it? Do they need it to be easy to use? Do they need it to view information? Do they need it to see bookings, classes? What do they need? What challenges might they face when they're using the system? So the challenges might be to do with how good the layout of the user interface is, whether they can find things. They may have accessibility needs. And then identify the general user group. So if it's adults, what will be their needs? As well as adults who are much older, how will their needs be different to general adults? You could also explore briefly and discuss the users with accessibility needs within this section, because don't forget, you'll have a separate section later on that will go into much more detail with regards to accessibility. So what do they need from it? Navigation, I would say it needs to be easy to use and consistent, because you don't want to go from one screen to another screen and it's completely different. Language, it needs to be simple. I would say if it's the adults that are using it, it needs to be jargon free, so that caters for older adults as well. And in terms of accessibility features, you briefly want to mention things like text to speech. Text to speech is a feature that is useful for individuals when they're using this user interface. Color has a big influence in terms of the users you target. Large buttons, so they're easy to see if you've got any visual impairment. Next will be the project requirements. For this, you really need to look through and carefully and read this scenario. It gives you lots of examples of the requirements. So the question I'd be asking is, what does the system want from? What does the business want from the system? So what must the system do? Does it allow booking? Does it allow reservation? Does it need to view, provide information? What is the key thing that the system needs to provide? And what constraints might affect the project? So is there a time constraint? Is there a budget constraint? Is there any other resource that could be a constraint? Think about the number of screens that you may need. You'll need to reference some core functions, the things that the business needs, the the user interface to provide and what that core function would be. And then again here you are going to explore and reference accessibility needs, because it is part of the requirements. They have in every single PSA identified some of the accessibility needs. So what must the system do? So I would say core functions would be things like viewing product, buying things, making reservation. Whatever this scenario is, you need to identify that and put that within your writing. Navigation, does it need to be easy to use? Does it need to be consistent? If that is the case, why does it need to be consistent? Your time scale, you're looking at your overall deadline. So how long do you have to complete this particular project? Are there any specific deadlines? What are the key milestones, resources you're going to need? And then for your accessibility, this will be based on how the system will be used. So the different users you're going to have and how you will cater for them. This section here is your accessibility. For this, the question I'd be asking is, what features will be needed to support individual needs of the user? Once I've got that question, my write-up's going to be much more easier and straightforward, because I can have a look at some of the accessibility needs. We may have users who are visually impaired. We may have hearing impaired users, motor impaired, and cognitive impaired. Now for each one, we need to kind of look, how are we going to cater for those users? If we've got users who are visually impaired, we want them to be able to zoom into text and images, not just text. We want to provide high contrast. We want to offer text-to-speech support within our digital information package. We might want to provide visual cues for those who have hearing impairment, confirmation. So when they click on the form and they've submitted a booking or they've submitted a reservation for a class, we might want confirmation. We might want to provide those details back to them. If we've got videos, we may want to provide some subtitles on those videos. For motor impairments, certain shortcuts that will help them navigate around the form, navigate around the user interface, and shortcuts would be useful. Voice control as well, if a feature that you may want to consider or incorporate within your write-up. And then the cognitive impaired, this would be linking to things like having clear instructions. If your instructions are clear, there's no an ambiguity within there, it will be jargon free. And it's really important to have a navigation that is simple to use, because that again will ensure the user is using the system, the user interface efficiently. Constraints. The question I'd be asking here is, what are the main project constraints? Constraints could be things like your budget, how much money you've been allocated and what you're going to spend that money on. The time you've been given. The key milestones. And accessibility. So for your budget, this needs to be referenced, and you could talk about or discuss things like any software that you may need, hardware that you may need, labor, money that you'll be spending on that. You could also mention things like training, any training that needs to be provided. For time, for this you need to read the PSA really carefully, because you've got a design section, you've got a development section, and you've got a review stage. And for each one, there's a set number of weeks allocated. So within your requirements, you're going to highlight that. It's not a case of just copy and pasting things from the PSA. You definitely need to interpret that and put it into your own words, whilst obviously referencing key bits of information that you copy. Constraints such as when design, development and review stages need to be completed. And in terms of accessibility, that would be the visual, cognitive and physical. So your key milestones, you definitely need to put when your key milestones are going to be, and then it needs to reference the design, development as well as review. So here's an example of a student's work. This was a June 2024 entry. This is a student who's got 11 marks. So it's a distinction. You can see for the purpose and audience, they've put a few paragraphs. So I've been given 10 weeks and 16,250 to design and create a digital information point for the cycling store. The purpose of the information point is to find information about different kinds of bike, special events, how to book a bike service, and how to arrange a bike fitting, which will all be fitting into 4 screens: home, bike information, special events, and services offered. The target audience of the user interface must be considered during every stage of the project. The target audience consists of adults, families, and customers with accessibility needs. Each screen must be consistent and clear to all users, therefore considering there'll be young children. Now I won't read everything, but you can see they've not copied and pasted from the assignment brief. What they've done is they've written things in their own words. They have referenced key bits of information from there. You can see they've allocated how much time. They've mentioned about how much time they've got. They've mentioned about the budget. They've mentioned about a little bit about the requirements, which are the 4 screens. They've mentioned about what this needs to provide. They've talked a little bit about design principles and things like consistency. They've mentioned about young children within there. And they've also talked about how they'll split the sections up. So that's your audience done. That's the purpose of the project done. The project requirements, you can see this extends further based on what they've put earlier. They've talked about the number of weeks again. They've talked about the budget. They've talked about the 4 slides. They've talked about the user interface. And they've discussed some of the accessibility considerations there. They've talked about modern design, consistency again. They've talked about simplicity here. Use of white space, consistent layout. So make sure you pause the video and you read through this and see the notes that they've made on here. And then you can see this section, they've added quite a bit of information. This is the accessibility section. They've talked about there'll be certain users that will have accessibility needs. They've discussed that they need to cater for those particular users, and they'll do that by having consistent design. The font will be clear and simple, high contrast. Use of home button, easy to use navigation. Colorblind filters. The language they use as well. And then the last one is your constraint. So your constraints are going to be limitations of the project. So things that may stop you from finishing the project on time. So it could be a time, that would be a constraint, how long you've got. You may not have enough time to complete that particular project, especially if you've got lots of subtasks. You might have constraints in terms of budget, how much money you've been allocated. It might be to do with staffing, having not enough staff to complete this. So you can see the user here has kind of added their own interpretation to things. They've expanded the information they've added, which is why if you read through the examiner report, they've said that this is a comprehensive example. And the reason why they've said that is because the learner has access to higher mark band. It's fully appropriate. They've expanded on the project requirements. So instead of just copy and pasting things, they've actually expanded on that. They've interpreted that. They've considered the purpose of the project, the audience, the requirements of the project, the user accessibility needs, the constraints, and it's fully reflected to the scenario, the cycling store. Nothing else. They've considered the budget there as well, the time they have. So you can see that's why they've got 11 marks. Now the next section is task 1B, and for task 1B you've got your planning stage. So this is where you're creating a Gantt chart. The best example of this would be just anything you do in Excel. If we look at this example, this has the task number. The tasks have been numbered quite clearly. The tasks have been given names. There's no they haven't kind of emphasized the design, the development stage, but you can kind of see the number of weeks that have been allocated. They've looked at the key milestone. Now, when you are doing this, it's really important to have some form of contingency in place, because when you are doing a project, there might be certain things that arise that will impact your project. So having some contingency would be useful. Maybe that could be an extra week that you offer. Maybe it might be lots of reviews and a meeting with the client. You can see here they're meeting the client there, doing the initial interview. Then their interview with the developer, and then again with the client. Another example of this, which I'll go to in a second, so you can see the tasks, the subtasks, the resources they're going to use, and the key milestone. This is another example of one, that's distinction. You can see here they've put quite clearly when the project was started. They've put the number of weeks. They've put the design, the development, and the review stage, and then they've kind of clearly specified the tasks within each section, the dependency for the task, the key milestones. So it is actually quite straightforward to do this once you get your head around the key things: the number of weeks you have, the tasks you have, when you're going to start the task, the dependency, and the key milestone. And then this kind of summarizes it quite well. So you've got your task list here. You have your start and end date for when this project is going to start. The progress we don't need to include in this one because it'll take too long, we haven't got enough. But the milestone and dependency is certainly something you need to consider and put. Here's an example of distinction. So this is 12 marks, 12 out of 12. You can pause the video, you can have a look at what the students put, but you can see they've put clearly when the project started, 30th of January 2024. You can see the number of weeks they have been allocated for the project, which is 10 weeks. The number of hours that have been allocated for each section. You can see the key milestones, the dependency, so the dependency based on the previous task, and you can see it's quite easy to follow. They've got some key notes here so you can identify that, and that is not a difficult design to follow. Now if we look at the examiner notes, the learner has used suitable project planning tools. So they've used Microsoft Excel to plan the timeline of the project. It includes the task and the subtasks that refer to the project brief. They've added a start date as well as what needs to be completed in each week. They've added their milestones. They've used realistic timings. There's lots of evidence to demonstrate understanding of project planning. So to summarize, the timescales, the task, the subtasks, and there's also meeting with the client as well. So they've done all of those things within them. So if we were to summarize, for task 1A, you're making sure that you are carefully reading through each section of the assessment. You're providing reference to that scenario. You're making key bits of notes. You're not copying and pasting things word for word. You are interpreting things in your own words. For 1B, we need to make sure that we read quite carefully the number of weeks we have, the budget, making sure we have the key bits of information within your design, your development, your review stage, making sure that they're numbered, and so on. So hopefully this has been useful. I have put all of this, the PowerPoint and also other resources for this, onto Teams for you.